Hey, welcome to day 5-ish, I guess, of the Tamiya Zero build. It's been a little bit since I streamed, been a bit delayed with some family business, but back in on it today, and so hopefully we got some interesting things for you to see today. So just kind of a recap of where we were. Last time I streamed, I did the top coat, the green, with a lot of masking. So quite a bit of masking. Might have been a little bit too much masking for one stream, but but we got it done. And I said that what I would do off stream was get a gloss coat on everything so that I could start the decaling. Didn't do that on stream because it was just more airbrushing. I also don't like doing gloss coats, and so there was a lot of cursing. I didn't want that on the stream. So we got that done. We gloss coated everything, so as you can kind of see on the wings, especially from this particular camera angle, got a lot of shine on the wings. And thankfully that's pretty uniform across the surface of the various pieces that we'll be working on today. We needed that gloss coat so that we could get the decals on and they'd sit really nice and smooth. Gloss coats, by their nature, are very smooth, kind of glass-like, and that makes a very nice surface to put decals down on. So we've got a gloss coat on the top, on the underside. I also did the blue for the underside of the flaps here off stream. Just a simple mask work there. The rest of the flaps also have the blue on the underside. And just kind of glossed everything. Now there's some parts that I glossed that aren't really likely to need decals. I wasn't particularly picky about what I glossed because it provides some protection for the paint under it. Even just kind of brushing it with your fingers can be enough to start messing with the paint that you put down. It could, especially if it's not a gloss finish. So like on a car, it's different because you have a gloss coat that you put down, a gloss paint you put down. But anything that's kind of got a flat paint is actually rough. That's why it looks flat. It's not a smooth surface, so the light doesn't refract all in one direction, so it gives that flat look. But as you touch it and you get some friction on there, even just enough by touching it, you actually start smoothing that out, and you'll start getting like shiny spots. Let alone the oils on your fingers and things like that that can cause problems for the paint. So so that's why we glossed everything. So even some things like these particular landing gear components covers. I don't think these have any decals that go on them, but I went ahead and glossed them anyway. So that two things. Again, one for the protection of the underlying paint, but also for the for a future step where I'm going to do some oil filtering so that it's not such a uniform color. So right now it looks kind of toy-like because it's perfectly uniform in its color, but we'll do some things that will hopefully help change that in the long run. So all the pieces you see here, with the exception of the canopy components, have been gloss coated so that we can decal them and get them nice and painted, or not nice and painted, but well, it is oil paint, but filtered later so that it looks a little bit more realistic. Had a kind of a happy accident on the wing here, on the left wing. You can see that the paint color isn't perfectly uniform. So I've got almost too much of a gloss coat on there. You can't really see it maybe from the camera. Trying to get a good angle on it. Maybe that. So if you see, it looks kind of mottled a little bit. That's actually kind of a good thing. It's a little bit of advanced weathering for me without having to actually do much of the weathering. So today, since we have a gloss coat on, is decal day. So I've got my water warming up so that we can do the decaling. I'm hopeful I will get most of it done today, but we'll see how long it takes. Sometimes decal work takes longer than you think it will. So we'll see how that goes today, and if you've got any questions as we go along, feel free to hop in and ask. And we'll see how it goes. So we'll be following the instructions for the placement of the decals. And I like to start with the fuselage rather than the wings, because it's easier for me to kind of handle it by the wings. So I can handle it pretty well. Get the decals on the sides of the fuselage, and then worry about the wings. And the last ones I'll probably put on will be that leading edge yellow. I've also switched the camera angle around to the right side now instead of the left. Hopefully that means that you can actually see what I'm doing a little bit better. But we're still kind of in the learning process here on exactly how to position everything to be seen. So hopefully I'll notice if I've got my hands in the way or off camera, but I ask for your patience with that if I'm not. So let's get started. Like I say, I like to work from the fuselage out. So we've got several decals that will be going onto the fuselage. And maybe a good place to start is one of the meatballs. So for this particular paint scheme that I picked, we used the white surround. There were others that had a black surround, but the particular version that we chose uses the white surround. So we'll start on the left side. Sorry about the chimes. And we'll see how it goes. So if you haven't watched all of some previous streams, I'm hoping to actually save some of these decals for another Zero made by a different manufacturer whose decal sheet had kind of yellowed to practically be unusable. So at least I should be able to reuse the extra roundels. But I may not have enough stencils and the like. I might have to. I bought this particular kit for that purpose so that I would have the extra decals, but in retrospect, it shouldn't have duplicates of everything. So the stenciling things that say no step, if you in Japanese, and the like. I won't have copies of those, so I may end up having to order a decal set anyway. So if you haven't seen my previous streams on decaling, just cut the decal out. I have the little glass container of water sitting on like a coffee warmer, because I've found that the decals release from their backing a little better when they're warm. So I set that in the water for just a few seconds, doesn't take very long. I'm going to come and clean a bit the spot where this decal will sit. In some ways, kind of polishing the already pretty shiny gloss coat on it. I'm off camera. Just with a handkerchief, basically. And I use a setting solution to really get it to conform to the panel lines and the curved surface of the fuselage. So I like to put a little bit on ahead of time. I'm just following the illustration on about where this goes. You can use the panel lines as kind of indicators of where to put it. So the nice thing about a circle is there's no up and down. You slide it off the paper onto the kit. I'll often kind of keep these hanging around. So I'm going to mute that. Kind of keep these hanging around until I'm done with a particular decal, in case I need to take it back off for some reason. So this one needs to come down a bit and over. I'm looking for some reference points. There's a couple of indentions there that the white portion needs to be right next to. And then it also needs to kind of come up to the edge of the wing root while just going over one of the panel lines here. So that should get us nice and generally located. So I'll come back with my cloth and kind of dab it down a little bit. See, I need to reposition my hands, but I'll do that in a moment, sorry. So I have a good general positioning. It's a little further forward than I want now. So I'll see if I can move it back just a little bit. So we use the setting solution again for a couple of reasons. It helps the decal settle down on the surface, trying to get as much air out from under it as we can. And it also softens the decal so that if there are any interesting features under it, like panel lines, it'll actually start to settle down into that panel line. So we've got a good coat on there, and there's decal 1. Very bright in comparison to the rest of the build so far, isn't it? But we use some landmarks. This panel line here, I think I actually shifted it a little too far aft now rather than too far forward, but I don't want to keep moving it, especially now that I've got a nice coat of this the setting solution on it, because it's going to get softer and easier to tear. So we'll be happy with it where it is. I have doubts that everyone was exactly in the exact same position, and if you can go find a particular picture of this exact aircraft and tell me, yeah, well, it should have been 3 inches forward, scale-wise, of course. Well, then I'll give you some internet points or something. So, one down. So we'll leave that wet for a while, again, so that the setting solution really kind of infuses the decal to really get it nice and set in the panel lines and such. So we toss the old paper, we don't need it anymore. And then we cut off the next one. So we've got some stars here, perhaps kill markers, I don't know. But that would be as good a guess as any, I suppose. Could be number of successful sorties. I suppose it could be any number of things. Pretty common for people for pilots to mark the number of kills they had on their aircraft. Now this is a particular aircraft and scheme that was very late in the war, 45. For those unfamiliar with World War II history, that was towards the end of the war. And at the beginning of the war, Japanese aircraft and their ships and everything were always immaculate, painted, immaculately cleaned. As the war pressed on, things got worse for the Japanese. They stopped being quite so enthusiastic about their maintenance. Lack of time, lack of resources, both physical and people, to keep that kind of immaculate condition up. So in reality, I should paint this as if it's been beaten up pretty bad. Lots of missing paint and just bare metal showing through. And I will do some of that. I'll do some weathering of it to do exhaust streaks and oil streaks and rain streaks and a lot of those kinds of things. But I personally have never really cared for the extremely heavily weathered look, even if it's scale, even if it's accurate. To me, it just doesn't look right in the scale. So I don't tend to do that myself, even if it is more technically correct. It's just not the way I like to build. So if you're one who is familiar with model building and this particular era, and you know that I'm not doing this right, well, I hope you'll forgive me. This is just the way I'm going to do it. So there you have it. All right, so positioning these markers, and they were pretty close to first marker, and just right along that panel line. It's probably difficult to see. And I'm checking. I need to be able to fit this guy in there as well. One of those little square, and I've got room there, so I think I'm going to leave it where we are now. I like the way that pops against the green. So now I'm just kind of making sure that we're level. And we'll press some of the air out. So clearly we've got most of the air out from under it, and again we're just using the the setting solution now to try to get the decal set down into the panel lines. It's starting to do that a little bit for this, especially on this lower panel line. Middle panel lines being a little bit more resistant. One of the things that I have to keep reminding myself of when I do this, though, is to not over handle the decal, especially when it's got the setting solution on it. It's very easy to tear when it's very wet with the setting solution, as it makes the decal softer. It's doing its job. If you look at it and you see it wrinkled and you think, oh no, it's not setting up right, and you go to touch it, and then you find out that you shouldn't have, because you tear the decal, or I've had some discolor a little bit. It's quite annoying. So, one thing I'll say now, so right now it still looks kind of very toy-like, right? Because you've got this very vivid contrast between the white and the green. What we'll do is we'll let these dry, and then we'll put another gloss coat on it, again, probably off stream. And let that dry, has to dry for 24 hours, and then we can come back with the oil paints, and we can do things like rain streaks and oil runoffs and exhaust stains from the exhaust manifolds on the front of the aircraft, and all kinds of things like that that will decrease the contrast difference between the colors. So we don't want it to go completely away, but we don't want it to be quite so vibrantly different. My wife is texting me. I think our puppy finally fell asleep. She's been a bit of a terror this morning. If you heard my text message ding go on. So just kind of positioning this. It doesn't quite, it lines up more with this panel at the bottom than with the panel line at the top, according to the illustration that I'm looking at. So we've got that there now. And I think that's in pretty good position. So soak that really well with the solution. You'll notice I keep going back to the others as well. Hopefully that's a little better. Adding some more solution to it to coax it further down into some of those panel lines. So I'm going to push some of the air out from under that stencil at the back. And then you recoat it with the setting solution. Don't want it to sit there soaked, but you do want it damp enough that the setting solution actually perforates the decal. Especially this guy. This guy has given me some resistance on setting into those panel lines. So it may take quite a bit. It's probably difficult to see, but you might be able to see a little bit of a difference in the line here. That's actually it setting into the panel line there. So it's starting to work. Just this particular decal, due to its size, they probably made it a little thicker, I guess, to prevent people like me from tearing it, from messing with it too much. So 3 down. Let's go ahead and hit the serial number on the tail identifier. Interestingly, the instructions. Oh no, okay. I was about to say they're all the same, but they're not. That's it. I was a little concerned there for a second that I'd only gotten one set of tail identifiers, but they're just in different colors, so that's why it looks different. So you may wonder what I mean by tail identifier. We have these kind of identifying numbers and letters. Pretty common on most aircraft. Now on this scale, there won't be as many stencils as you'd find in a larger scale. So what do I mean by that? They would paint instructions over panels to say what's behind it, or markers to show, here's where you can cut to rescue the pilot, or anything that need to be easily understood without having to go find some manual or expert or something, would be marked with stencils like that. So they literally had stencils, they kind of painted them on. You might see on US aircraft, especially no step along the edge of the wings, so that people would not stand on surfaces that weren't meant to support a person's weight. But in this scale, most of those kind of disappear, just too small. So you don't end up seeing a lot of that on this scale, thankfully. That would have been a large undertaking. So this one's going to be a bit of a challenge because we have a decal that spans the vertical stabilizer as well as the rudder. And so it's going to take a bit of effort to get that to sit well in that gap. So you see what I'm talking about really quickly. That gap here is actually quite deep because they were separate pieces. So I'll need to do some work on getting that nice and settled into that gap. Make sure it's level. I'm kind of using the 1 there, since it would be vertical, as a reference to its verticalness, I guess, to get that nice and smoothly on there. So this is a pretty thin decal. Have to be very careful not to mess with it too much for fear of ripping or distorting it. But I also want to make sure that it sits very well because it has a lot of this clear backing film on it. And if we don't get all the air out from under it, that's when you start to see the fogging or the silvering that we're trying to avoid. So we've got it mostly in place. Get some setting solution on it so that it'll soften, kind of let the air out, and sink into those gaps nicely. So luckily, because it's so thin, it's actually already sinking fairly well into that major crevice. But we'll also want it to align with the other panel lines on the tail. So I'm going to leave that alone now. Let's go pay attention to the ones we put on earlier. This red is being very difficult, but I'm starting to see the panel lines I want to see. So we are getting there. And later I'll actually do some pressing on it to encourage that even further. But it's not quite ready for that yet. So there we have most of the left side done. Going back and looking at the instructions, we have the roundel, we've got the markers, we've got the stencil, and we've got the tail marker. So I'm going to go back and look at, so that was an accessory instruction. There's also, yep, see I missed one, so there's another one here. Don't know why we've got two separate instructions. It's a little frustrating. But whatever, it is what it is. So we've got two that we missed here. One at the wing root, and one under the tail. So let's see what those are. 51. The black arrow that will disappear probably, but we'll go ahead and put it on anyway. And then some lettering, probably about a lift point or something under the tail. So we'll go ahead and put those on. It will be very difficult for you on the stream to see because, as I'll show you in just a moment, this is a very tiny arrow. So very small little arrow there. And that's what I mean by these stencils being less common on aircraft of this size because they just end up disappearing. By this size, I mean the scale. But if this was in 32nd scale or even larger, there'd be a heck of a lot more stencils. So this one should be pretty straightforward, just to sit there in the wing root. Shouldn't take long in the warm water. Put the decal on there. I'm floating in the setting solution. No, it's actually stuck on my brush. So tiny it came off paper, but stayed on the brush. And the arrow's pointing the wrong way. These little ones are fun. There. So this will be one that I won't probably be able to show you. It's just too small. But we've got the air pressed out of it. We're going to put a small dab of the setting solution on it. And let that go. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to the big guy here. Encourage settling into the panels. These other two are already doing pretty well. And something else I'm going to try, so I mentioned earlier, it's not something I've actually tried before. Usually what I do is I put a gloss coat on, I put the decals on, I let them dry really well, and then I put a flat coat on top of it, because ultimately these wouldn't have been shiny. But I think this time I'm going to do gloss, decals, gloss, then my weathering, and then the flat coat, just to try to help the decals settle a little bit better. Really kind of disappear. It'll build up a little bit of a buffer around the clear film surface on the edges of the decals. So you can't see it yet. I'll wait for this to dry a little bit, and I'll show it to you. It is starting to set into those panels nicely. So I need the other tail piece. We are doing the A version, the A set of markings. So there's different lettering under the tail. Sorry for the sniffles. I've got a lot of wind in the area recently. It's kicked something up that's kicking my butt. So what we're doing is putting this this marker here on. It's got some Japanese lettering and then an arrow. So again, probably something like a lift from here, or here's where the tail wheel is, or something of that nature. I suppose it could be something completely different. I don't read Japanese, but that would be my guess. Again, decals that small don't take long to release. You wait too long, you might come back to see your decal floating in the water off of the paper, and that's never a happy time. So this one, I'm actually going to flip the aircraft over for a moment so that I can get the decal off. There we go. And I want it almost grabbed it by the decal, that would not have been good. I want the top of it up against the panel line, and based on the visual I've got here, goes under the third rivet. So we're being very accurate. And we've got a nice and vertical marker there. So we'll put a little bit more setting solution on it so that it settles well. And it is pointing right to where, this would be where the tail hook would be if this were equipped with a tail hook, since I'm using the one for an airbase. It doesn't have the tail hook, but that's what that's pointing to. So must serve another purpose in this case. So maybe you can see it. Let's see. You can kind of, hopefully with the light change there, you can see how it's settling into the panel lines, especially here, but here as well. So it's starting to nicely settle there. Still needs some more setting solutions. I'm going to try just using some pressure to see if I can get it to settle a little bit. So I'm just gently pressing with my cloth. It's also settling into the rivet. The rivets nicely, so that'll be a nice touch as this finishes up. Unfortunately, it's also showing me that my paint was not particularly smooth. Probably means I should have done another gloss coat before doing the decaling, but that's okay. So it's still not quite where I want it. I'm going to put a little bit more setting solution and let that sit while we move on, probably to the other side of the aircraft now. That always becomes a bit of a challenge because you don't want to accidentally press against the decals on the side that you just finished. So if I'm working on this side and I squeeze, if I'm working on this side and I squeeze, then I'll accidentally touch the decals on the other side. And while they're relatively robust, they're not invincible. So care is required. Excuse me. So as we did on the left, now on the right, I will start with the Meatball. Not as many decals on this side, so those gold markings and the stencil don't exist on this side, so it's just the Meatball, the tail marker, and then actually the stencil is pointing to where the tail hook would be. We'll cut this guy out. I know some people will even try to trim as much of the clear backing off as they can. My hands aren't that steady, so I don't usually try that, unless it's maybe an older kit that has some really bad backing to it, it's too thick or something. But in this case, we don't have that problem. So the fun part now is kind of aligning everything so that if you looked down from the top, they look like they're well aligned. Again, I realize in reality that they wouldn't be perfectly aligned. They were painted on by humans, of course. No machinery, no automation. But the human eye is great at picking up inconsistencies. And even if it's okay from a technical point of view, it'll look funny visually. And with something as prominent as these, we want to do our best to line them up. Luckily, we have some similar landmarks on both sides, so that helps. Got some rivets and panel lines and such. That should make it a little easier to align. So we had it just over this vertical panel line and just touching the wing root. So we'll do the same thing on this side, just over the panel line and just touching the wing root. So when we look down, we're a little too far forward. That looks pretty good to me. So, step one is to get some of that air out. Don't want to press too hard because you can actually imprint your fingerprints or the patterning of the imperfect cloth. Just trying to squeeze a little bit of the air out. And then we'll come back fairly heavy with the setting solution so that just like on the other side, we start getting into those panel lines. Helps settle into the panel lines. It helps the clear backing that's probably not visible to you on the screen, but it's quite visible in person, to settle well so that it does not show up in the end. So right now I can still see it, but once I get that second gloss coat on it, it should disappear. So good. So I'm not going to mess with that one anymore. I've got it about where I want it, because if I look from this angle vertically, they look pretty well aligned to me. At least good enough for my satisfaction. And since it's my model, that's enough. So we'll move on to the tail marker. So we had a nice happenstance on the other side that the tail markers, number one, lined up well with the gap between the tail surface, the vertical surface, and the rudder. Unfortunately, we don't have that quite as well here, but we've got the edge of the D that we might be able to line up pretty well. So that's what we'll target. We also want to try to make sure that, again, they're the same height, more or less. So we want it to line up on the other side pretty well. So that will be the challenge. Two challenges here. Making sure that the identifying marks settle well into that gap between the rudder and the vertical surface, as well as being visually aligned with what's on the other side. Again, it would have been done by a person, so it wouldn't have been perfect. But the human eye picks up imperfections very well. And even if it doesn't need to be perfect, historically, I guess, visually, it's another matter. So you know, I've got this on the right side now, my camera. I thought since I was right-handed and I work on the right side more, it would be easier for you guys to see it. Hopefully it is for the most part, but I noticed that my hand is often in the way too, so I think I need a more like top-down approach. So I'll look into that to make it a little easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. So we nearly got that perfectly aligned. I just checked. It's nearly exactly where I want it. I need to come down just a little bit. That's nice. Yeah, so I think I'm still a little too high. Just a little too high. This decal is so thin, it makes it difficult to move. I think maybe I just succeeded. Let's see. Yep. So I like where it is. So I'm not going to mess with trying to move its position anymore. I'm just going to try to make it settle well into that gap using my setting solution. And we'll leave that be for a moment. So I'm going to put some more setting solution on the Meatball. I'm going to go back to the other side, check out my first one, and it is nicely settling now into those panel lines. It's still, I mean, the panel lines aren't incredibly deep, so I mean, it's not going to be a stark settling. Maybe not even something that's going to be easily visible on stream, but trying to get it to settle as well as possible. I think I've just about gotten it as good as it's going to get. So while the tail marker on this side and the Meatball are setting, we can go back to the original instructions with the manual's instructions and make sure that we get the tail marker, the tail hook marker placed as well. So that was where? Here, 50, right? Yes. So we'll cut that one out. Again, it's just that little Japanese script with an arrow, probably saying, you know, here's the tail hook or some such thing. Drop that in the water. Let that set for a few seconds. Small decals don't take long. Again, we'll flip this guy over. And luckily we have the same kind of markers on this side as we did on the other. So we'll drop him off in the same way. And then, as on the other side, we'll align it with that third rivet and panel line. Exit. So that mostly takes care of the fuselage. In fact, I think it completely takes care of the fuselage. So now we can move on to the wings. Yeah, so I think this guy has settled just about as well as he's gonna. Tail marker's looking good though. So we'll keep coming back to the starboard roundel, meatball, whatever. There's a technical name for it, Japanese name for it, I don't know it. Slang was meatball. So there we have it. So now we can start working on the other markings. So I think I'll start with the top surface first. Again, starting on the left side, port side. And I'll probably work from inside out to try to keep from accidentally handling the large meatball that will be here. So again, not a whole lot of decals to deal with. Just a few. Some of them will be somewhat challenging. So that will be interesting. So there's one that'll sit here, kind of a navigational light. Then we also have a marker that goes along the outside of an area that shouldn't be stepped on. And then the roundel. We'll do both wing tops. We'll do the underside of the aircraft. And then actually what we might do is we might do the tops, the leading edge, and then the underside, so that we don't set it back down. Or we might, once we're done, we might actually use my stir stick pieces that I used so that we don't set the decals down and potentially mess with them up. There's good words. Good words. Words are hard. All right, so got these little, I don't know if they're landing lights or navigational markers. There's actually some navigational markings that I need to paint on the vertical surface. There's these little protrusions. They're probably difficult to see, but they're actually landing lights, and they'll be painted red and green once all is said and done. But that will be one of the last things that I do. This guy sits on this little panel surface. A little bit of setting solution on before, just to kind of give it a place to adhere. You won't be able to see it, but there is actually a little black line at the front of this marking. So we'll want to make sure that it's pointing in the right direction. You can see how much I'm handling the wings by the front and the back, so you might understand why I don't want to put those leading edge decals on until I'm just about done handling it. That's good. So that went on nicely. So you can see that not much, but it stands out a lot, especially against that dark green. So next we'll do the do not steppy. Let's see, we need 10 and 15. These will be interesting to cut out. Excuse me. So I like that they made this one decal because it would be difficult to line up the corners. But I'm going to go ahead and bet in advance that this is going to be difficult to place. So we'll see how that goes. That's in the water. It lines this section here. So we have this L that kind of goes along the wing root and down the panel line, and then another that actually is on the trailing edge of the wing. And that is separate. I've seen these done as a full rectangle, and that's problematic because then you have this huge white, or this huge clear transfer film in the middle of the decal, and it becomes very difficult to get it all laid down nicely. Or you have a very difficult cut to make. So let's see how this goes down. So we've got the decal. I'm lining it up the best I can. And see about smoothing it out there. Okay, not great, but at least in the general position. So the instructions say this should go all the way down to the trailing edge. So I'm trying to almost float it on the setting solution to give me enough slack in the decal to get it all the way down there. This is a tricky type of decal because it's easy to tear it, for one thing. But also because it's long and thin, it's easy to not have it straight. And since this is supposed to be following a straight line, it can be problematic. But I think we managed to do it. So what do you think? Pretty good. We've got a little bit that hangs off the edge with the clear film. I'll have to work down with the setting solution so that it doesn't cause problems later. But I think that went on pretty well. I'm going to come back to the side here while it's sitting for a second. Add some more setting solution over here. Again, trying to get those panel lines that this sits over to come through. Now they're not really deep panel lines. They're to scale, so they shouldn't be very deep. But they would be visible because this would have been painted on. And so we want to at least have them show up. So that's what we're trying to do by adding the setting solution. It worked very well over here. You can see, I can see, you may not be able to, but the 3 panel lines, 1, 2, and 3, do show up pretty nicely over here. Same's true through the stencil. It worked pretty well. And the tail marking is starting to come through nicely as well. It was already sitting down in the gap between the tail surface and the rudder very well. It's also starting to catch the panel line. So it's kind of one of those processes that takes a few shots. You get the decal on there, let it set for a while, come back and touch it up a little bit. Try not to touch it too much because you can tear it, but there we have it. So, I also don't like setting solution just to sit randomly because it can actually mar the paint, so I had some drops there somehow. Gently brush that off. Alright, so that went really well. Props to Tamiya on a nice, robust yet still thin decal. I think I'm going to hold off on the trailing edge for a moment. Let that L shape really dry. Then I'll come back and do that, especially since I tend to handle it, as I've said, from the trailing and leading edge. If I did that now and put that trailing edge there, I would damage it. So we'll wait on that, and we'll move instead to the only other major decal, I think. Yeah, the only other major decal on this surface is the Meatball. So we will do that next. This one's got a lot of panel lines under it, and rivets and all kinds of detail, including having to go over this little hump here that will have a piece sticking out of it eventually that is part of the control surface. This will be a little bit more challenging to get it to set nicely. So we've got it cut out, drop it in our water. Again, using warm water, it's just in a glass container on a coffee mug warmer. It seems to help loosen the setting solution a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and pre-apply some of the setting solution There's a lot of detail that I don't want this to miss as it settles. So this will help make sure that it gets into those gaps nicely. So hope everybody's having a nice Sunday. Pretty quiet one here. The puppy slept mostly through the night, so that was nice. He's getting better about that. So here you can see what I've got it in, just this Pyrex dish. So we will slide it off, try to pre-position it a little bit, move it as little as possible once it's on there, but we will want to make sure that it's in the right spot. So this will be somewhat challenging because of that, that surface that we've got to get it set over. But I think we can do it. It will take a while for it to soften enough to really set over that hump, but it will. I just have to keep coming back with the setting solution and some minor pressure. Very easy to tear it in that situation though, so I'm going to have to take my time with that. It's already starting to settle down a little bit. So I think I've got this pretty much where I want it. Kind of comparing it to the pictures. Excuse me for a second while I move this off camera. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So that's about where I want it. I'm going to try to press a little bit of the air out of it. Again, not putting too much pressure because I don't want to imprint my fingerprint or the pattern of this textile into the decal. And then go back and re-soak it so that it starts to settle down. If you're new to the stream and haven't seen some of the previous videos, crap, it already tore. I have to be careful about that. If you're new to the stream and haven't seen some of the previous videos, they're all on my Twitch for a little while longer, but I also, just yesterday, actually created a YouTube channel and migrated them all over. So the link is on my Twitch channel if you wanted to see some of the previous videos. So I've got to be very careful on handling this now. You might not see it. Let's see. Yeah, it's going to be hard to show, but just on this side it did tear a little bit on that hump, as I was afraid it might. So I'll have to be careful about how I handle that, getting it to settle down like I want. I was afraid of that, but something I'm still working on myself, trying to get decals to settle down on complex surfaces like that just is not something I'm very comfortable with yet, even having done this as long as I have. Work in progress. Alright, so while this is settling a little bit and I'm not touching it, we'll get the trailing edge surface decal added. So this is just a long straight piece, but with some lettering, probably saying something like "Don't step here." And we'll go along this trailing edge. So hopefully I will remember it's there and not pick it up by that trailing edge anymore, but we'll see. Small decals don't take long, and it already came off the backing. So now we get to try to put it back on the backing before taking it out, because this is not something that I can. That's a pain. I managed to mostly do it. There we go. So what I'd feared happened. It slid off its backing in the water, and so I had to kind of fish it out a little bit. Alright, so this needs to sit pretty flush with the trailing edge. So again, we'll use the setting solution to kind of float it. It's already pretty damp from the water, but I did not pre-wet the surface. It's not extremely mobile, but we want it to line up nicely in the corner with the first one that we put on. While also sitting nicely along that trailing edge. This will have a lot of its clear backing film kind of hanging over the edge. So this will take several applications of the setting solution to make sure that it doesn't stay visible. I'm going to try to push some of the air out gently. I think we just about did it. So probably is extending a little too far outbound, but I don't really want to mess with it. I think I'm just going to be happy with it as it is. Hopefully you guys are okay with that. Really soaking this guy. There's a lot of detail under there. Starting to settle around that hump. That tear might have actually helped me out a little bit in that regard. I'll probably have to come back with a dab of white paint or something to completely cover up the fact that it tore. But overall, it's not a terrible thing. Just gotta be careful not to tear it more. So, added some more setting solution so that it will continue to settle. Almost grabbed it by that trailing edge, just like I thought I might. But I remembered last second. This starboard side meatball is starting to settle in nicely. So that's about it for the left wing. We'll let those decals settle a bit more before messing with them some more, especially this trailing edge. We're really going to want to make sure that trailing edge of the trailing edge decal settles nicely. Give us a smooth surface to paint over later. Again, I still need to do the leading edge and the decals, which will be these yellow decals, but I'm going to leave those for last, I think. So we'll switch to the other side, and we basically have the same decals. We have one additional that we didn't have on this side, but we'll see that as we go. So we'll start with the little guy again, the little red marker. A little bit of setting solution where it's going to go. Again, does not take long. The decals is small. This one also has that little black marker that you won't be able to see on stream. It needs to go forward. That does it. Dang it, I moved it. Yeah, I think this starboard side fuselage decal is as set as it's going to be. So I will stop soaking it in solution now. I'm just going to let it, when I say that, I'm going to do it one more time. Okay, next is that L shape, so we'll cut it out. And drop it in the water. Quickly pre-soak its general path. Just help it settle. and then quickly get it out of the water because we saw how quickly that can release once that narrow and that thin. And then place it. Alright, now we try to push some of that air out, again quite gently. Trying to straighten it out a little bit, it got a little crooked. I think we're good there. And there's the corresponding side. So just as before, we'll let that dry a little bit. We'll move on to the meatball on the outside. Same issues here. We've got to be careful about that hump. Drop it in the water. Get the location nice and prepped. We're releasing pretty quickly now with the heat of the water. Even decals this size seem to be releasing pretty quickly. Helps if I don't prep it. Twice. All right. It actually looks about right already. So we'll leave that be for a bit. You may have noticed I put some more setting solution on left one. Really trying to get it to settle into the panel lines and such under it. There are quite a few of them. Also trying to get it nice and settled around that little hump. And it's starting to. It did tear, as I noted earlier. I should be able to fix that with a little bit of paint later. Okay, so now we can do the trailing edge of that don't step here marker. Very quickly wet the trailing edge. And I'll pull this out because it separated so fast last time. I don't want to chase it again. We have it on the plastic. Let's see if we can get it into position. Use the setting solution to kind of float. Make it easier to move. That goes nicely. A little too far off the edge. Alright, gonna push some air out of it. And add some more setting solution to get that clear transfer film nice and settled. And go back and do the same thing on the other side, add some more. Ultimately to try and get that clear film to wrap around the edge a little bit. I don't know why my... Sorry about that. We are making progress here. We've just about finished the vertical surface, the dorsal surface, I should say. We had one more extra decal on this side that we didn't on the port side. It's not the right one. Almost put the wrong decal on there. So it's this little panel marker of some sort. There's no panel line that it goes on or anything, so we're just going to kind of eyeball about where we think it should go. Make sure we have it right side up. It's easy when I'm placing a decal on a US aircraft or a British aircraft or something because I can read it. Here I don't know what these symbols mean, so it would be unfortunate to not know that and accidentally put one on upside down or something. Looks good. That's it. Panel lines and rivets and things are starting to come in on this left roundel. And that's starting to settle around that hump, although it tore a little bit more, unfortunately. A growth opportunity for myself. All right. So that basically finishes everything but the underside. You can see from the underside, obviously 2 more roundels and a few more minor decals here and there. And then of course the leading edge that we'll have to take care of, both dorsally and ventrally. And then a few more stencils identified here. I think, however, what I'm going to do, I want this to dry very well before I flip it over and start handling it. I'll also just be coming back a few times with the setting solution on these large meatballs just to try to get them to settle well into the panels. And this right one over the hump. If I can do so without tearing it, that would be great. So I think probably what I'm going to do at this point is end the stream, because it's also getting kind of lunchtime and I'm starting to get hungry. And then I'll probably finish the rest of the decals off stream. So I'll finish the underside off stream, I'll finish the leading edge off stream, put another gloss coat on it off stream. And the next stream will be doing the oil filters and washes and things to really pop out some of the details of the aircraft. So for those of you who hung around for the majority of the stream, or for those of you who joined a little bit later, thanks for hanging out. If you haven't followed me on Twitch, I'd appreciate it if you could do so. I also have a YouTube channel, again linked through my Twitch channel, or you can find it at I'm Johnny5 on YouTube. If you would go check that out and maybe toss me a subscribe there, I'd appreciate it. Thirdly, I have Twitter, also under I'm Johnny5, so if you want to be alerted to when I go live and you don't have your Twitch notifications going off, you can follow me there as well and send me some thoughts, or just see when I go live at that point. So thanks again for hanging out, and we'll catch you next time.